Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Noy Shamir Heinrich.
And I'm Yochanan El Rom.
In our top story, another round of negotiations wrapped up in Qatar in a last-ditch effort to reach a hostage release and ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Negotiating teams from Israel, the United States, Egypt, and Qatar gathered in Doha to renew talks aimed at securing the release of 109 Israeli hostages who remain in Hamas captivity. Hamas boycotted the negotiations, forcing its ally Qatar to mediate on its behalf. Following Hamas's initial rejection of the renewed deal, the U.S. drafted a bridging proposal in hopes of bringing the terror group back to the negotiating table. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded to the proposal and said that the pressure to reach a deal needs to be directed at Hamas and its leader Yahya Sinwar and not at the Israeli government. Netanyahu added that the complex negotiations with the murderous terrorist organization does not constitute a scenario in which Israel will just give and give. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited the region this week to promote the deal. In a press statement on Monday, Secretary Blinken claimed that Israel accepted the U.S. proposal and pressured Hamas to do the same.
The IDF retrieved 6 bodies of Israeli hostages held by Hamas during a complex raid in the city of Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanked Israeli soldiers and security forces involved in the mission for their bravery and determined action. 5 out of the 6 captives had earlier been declared dead by the Israeli army. The 6th hostage was taken alive into Gaza by the Iranian-backed terror group and then killed. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said the operation to retrieve the bodies involved forces entering Hamas's underground terror tunnels. The mission relied on precise information provided by the IDF's military intelligence unit and the Shin Bet, Israel's internal security agency. Gallant reiterated Israel's commitment to achieving its 2 primary war objectives of bringing back all the hostages and dismantling the Hamas terrorist organization.
Last week, a bomb carried by a Palestinian man exploded outside a synagogue in central Tel Aviv. Israeli police confirmed that the incident was indeed a terrorist attack and said that a powerful explosive device went off, injuring 1 person. Hamas has taken responsibility for the attack, a suicide bombing which it coordinated with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group. The presumed terrorist was carrying a bomb in his backpack, which exploded outside the Shimon Bar Yochai synagogue, where over 100 people were praying. An Israeli police spokesperson said that if the explosion went off a few meters closer to the worshippers, Israel would have woken up to a huge disaster. Hamas threatened that it will continue to conduct terror operations in Israel as long as Israel continues its ground operation in Gaza.
Once again, the presidential campaign of Kamala Harris is under fire for its continued contacts with dangerous anti-Israel figures who are leading the charge against Israel's right to defend itself against terrorism. Harris's campaign manager, Julia Chavez Rodriguez, met with Osama Siblani, the editor of Arab American News. The virulent anti-Israel journalist called the Hamas and Hezbollah terrorist groups freedom fighters and said that he does not apologize for Hamas's indiscriminate rocket fire at Israeli civilian population centers. The Anti-Defamation League came out against Harris and stated that any person who denies that Hamas is a terrorist organization should not be meeting with appointed and elected officials to discuss foreign policy. And the Republican Jewish Coalition said the American Jewish community cannot trust Kamala Harris. The meeting came on the backdrop of last week's Democratic National Convention in Chicago, where the anti-Israel uncommitted movement tried to sway Democrats to stop U.S. aid to Israel amid its war with Hamas and Iranian terror proxies.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei is showing signs of impatience as the world waits for the Iranian-led attack on Israel. The dictator told legislative officials that the Islamic Quran warns that a retreat of this type will result in divine wrath. Khamenei stressed that since the victory of the Iranian Revolution, Iran's enemies have been trying to spread fear in the Islamic Republic to make its people and its leadership afraid of the U.S., UK, and the Zionists. He stated that Iran needs to rely on strength to reach its goals of Islamic supremacy.
The Lebanon-based Hezbollah terrorist organization is still in disarray over Israel's targeted airstrike, which eliminated its top commander, Fuad Shukr, last month. A Hezbollah official told the Wall Street Journal that the terror group teamed up with its primary supporter, Iran, to find the source of the security failure. New details regarding the assassination reveal that Shukr received a phone call instructing him to move from his second-floor office to his seventh-floor residence. Well, that move made him an easier target. Moments later, Israeli explosives rained down on the building, leaving Shukr and his wife dead. It's believed the fatal call came from an entity who breached Hezbollah's internal communications network. The official said it is likely Israel was able to defeat the terrorist group's counter-surveillance program with its advanced technological intelligence and hacking capabilities. The killing has shaken the organization, who lost one of its most prominent terrorist masterminds.
In a targeted move against the Jewish state, the South American country of Colombia announced it is banning the sale of coal to Israel. Colombia's President Gustavo Petro signed an order banning all coal exports to Israel in an effort to pressure the Israeli government and its prime minister to end the war against Hamas in Gaza. Back in May, the Colombian president announced that his country was cutting its diplomatic relations with Israel and called on other countries to do the same. Colombia is the primary supplier of coal to Israel, and in 2023, Israel purchased $450 million worth of the fossil fuel. Despite the ban, Israel's energy security is not believed to be in danger, and its electric corporation has alternative sources available.
New York Times journalist Natasha Frost leaked the private information of 600 Australian Jews, exposing them to death threats and vandalism by anti-Israel hate groups. The reporter circulated 900 pages of private details from WhatsApp groups created to support the Australian Jewish community after the October 7th Hamas attack and the disinformation campaign which followed. The New York Times said it would take disciplinary action against Frost, who admitted to sharing the sensitive information with one person, but claimed the result of the leak was unintentional. The 600-member WhatsApp group was made up of Jewish businessmen and women, academics, and others who are now the targets of pro-Palestinian activists that have threatened and harassed them both in person and online.
At the launch event of the Democratic National Convention last Monday, U.S. President Joe Biden spoke about pro-Palestinian protesters, saying that they have a point and that a lot of innocent people are being killed on both sides. Anti-Israel protests have swept the streets of the United States since October 7th. Violent demonstrators have been calling for an intifada and pressuring the United States to cut military and financial aid to Israel, while openly supporting Hamas, a U.S.-designated terrorist organization. College campuses have been a focal point of these demonstrations, creating fear among Jewish students who are being harassed and threatened by extreme demonstrators. These same demonstrators were arrested after dozens attempted to break into the indoor arena of the convention before being stopped by the police.
Amid the growing crisis in the Middle East, Houthi militia forces in Yemen plan to carry out a major attack on American warships and Israeli ports. The attacks would come in response to Israel's airstrikes of the Houthi-run port city of Hodeidah and the targeted killings of Hamas and Hezbollah terror bosses. Since the onset of the Israel-Hamas war, Houthi terrorists have been launching weaponized drones and firing missiles at Israel and attacking international ships crossing the Red Sea. According to a report in the Wall Street Journal, the Houthis have vowed to escalate their attacks against Israel and American targets. Now, this is causing concern in Iran as Tehran deliberates the magnitude and timing of its planned retaliatory attack against Israel. Iran fears increased aggressions by its proxy in Yemen could destabilize the region and lead to an all-out war.
The Samaria Regional Council launches a new campaign calling for the resettlement of Jews in Gush Katif, an area in the Gaza Strip which formerly housed 21 Jewish communities that were evacuated as part of Israel's 2005 withdrawal from Gaza, known as the disengagement. The campaign links Israel's withdrawal from the now Palestinian territory to Hamas's October 7th massacre of Israelis, which left 1,200 people dead while 250 were taken captive into Gaza. Billboards with images of Israel's withdrawal side by side with the October 7th attacks, reading "The Reason, the Result," were placed throughout Israel as part of the ad campaign. The billboards also read Gush Katif in northern Samaria, "We are returning home." The head of Samaria Regional Council, Yossi Dagan, called on the Israeli government to allow Jews to resettle in the Katif bloc. saying that everyone understands that the disengagement led to the disastrous October 7th attack.
That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Michael Sullivan. He's the founder of Texas Scorecard from the great state of Texas. Michael, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Tell our viewers a little about what is Texas Scorecard.
So Texas Scorecard focuses on helping citizens know what's going on in their government. Our focus is on state and local government in Texas. That's the cities and the schools, the counties, and then of course the state. We want to make sure that Texans know what their elected officials are doing so that Texans can do a better job of overseeing and holding accountability to their government. We also write on what Texas's members of Congress are doing, again, making sure that citizens have an ability to know what's going on, unfiltered by the left-wing bias of the press, and make sure that what candidates say when they're campaigning lines up with what they do when they're in an elected office.
Well, you're a conservative organization. You're Texas-focused, yet Israel is actually an issue. You look at how people support Israel as one of the criterias of how you score their job. Why is Israel so important?
Israel is really important, I would argue, for a couple of reasons. It's an amazing trading partner for Texas. The relationship between Texas and Israel is really good for both of our people, where it matters most to people, that is their pocketbook. You're talking billions of dollars in trade, millions of dollars in investment back and forth. These are two Lone Star states that do very well for each other economically. There's also just a very important sense of kind of, if you will, a kindred spirit between the people of Israel and the people of Texas. I think it's important for our founding values that we all need friends to hold each other accountable to the things that we say that we believe in and the things that we say are important to us. And so, Texans need a strong Israel to help us remember what we believe. We have our big come and take it flag. Israel needs Texas to help you guys remember what you say you stand for and believe in. Friends need that with each other. There are a lot of really important reasons, but I think those are the two most important for me.
It's interesting that a lot of people don't know the origin story of the high-tech center in Texas, that actually Governor Rick Perry started an investment fund and invested in high-tech in Israel. And the term was that all Israeli companies have to start their headquarters in Texas, and that's what really gave birth to it. And now, of course, you have Elon Musk coming there and a lot of the big companies.
Right.
How important is the startup nation when it comes to your high-tech?
It is critically important when you look at what that has sparked. Someone could dismissively say, it was a couple of companies and a couple of bucks. But all it takes is a couple of companies and a couple of bucks to see that gravity well starting to build. It's like the way a star forms of all the bits and pieces of interstellar flotsam come together and poof, suddenly it's a bright shining star. And that's what I think that high-tech relationship between the companies of Israel and Texas managed to do, is that now you have companies that have no tie to Israel but are moving to Texas because of those initial startup companies. It's pretty exciting to watch. It proves that the free market works, Josh. It's a reminder that the free market benefits everyone, and all it takes is just a little bit of innovation and a little bit of foresight to get that spark going.
Well, you practice what you preach. You're here in Israel during wartime. What's your experience like? Why did you come?
One, I wanted to get a sense for myself of what was happening in Israel. You turn on the news in the United States or anywhere else in the world, and maybe you're getting the truth, maybe you're not. But the one thing that won't deceive you is your own eyes and your own ears. And so spending a few days in Israel to get a chance to see what's really happening. And I'll tell you, I was here a little over a year ago. And when I was here a little over a year ago, there were protests in the streets about, this issue, and they just got the normal humdrum of, any kind of well-functioning nation where the people will get mad about something. What's been fascinating for me to see now being back here, look, it's horrible. The circumstances are horrible, but I'm seeing an Israel that is more unified than I've known it to be in my adult lifetime.
One of the things that you mentioned is that it's important when it comes to the hostages that people have a personal connection. Yet there are 8 American hostages being held by Hamas today, and people in America don't know their name. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a couple of reasons. Number one, I think the complicity of the crony establishment media. Let's don't talk about them. Second, I think that there's a sense that, they put themselves in harm's way, so it's kind of their fault. Now, of course, that narrative breaks apart when we talk about a surprise attack, that no one would have thought would happen on a random Saturday in October. I think the third reason is we've all been kind of conditioned to when it involves Israel, we've been told that, just look the other way. And Americans need to start looking this way. At the Republican convention a few weeks ago, you had the parents of one of the young men being held hostage speak, and they received a outpouring of love and support from the Republicans at the convention, demonstrating that some Americans are starting to recognize there's more at stake here than just something 7,000 miles away. There are real people involved.
Michael, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
The single most important thing that we as citizens can do is recognize that we have to be united. We have to work together with other people. We have to build those relationships, even when our governments, even when the cultural elite don't want us to. We need to make sure that we're building relationships with real people, and that we then together join in holding our governments accountable and making sure that we're striving for a great peace, the kind of peace that I would argue is embodied by Jerusalem.
Thank you, Michael, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
And now, the truth from Zion.
The relationship between the European Union and Israel has grown increasingly strained over the past few decades. This tension has been fueled by a variety of factors, including differing political ideologies, human rights concerns, and geopolitical dynamics. The perception that the EU has become anti-Israel stems from its policies and actions regarding the only Jewish state. The EU and Israel share a complex history. Initially, European nations were supportive of the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, recognizing the historical and moral justifications for a Jewish homeland following the horrors of the Holocaust. However, as the decades progressed, the relationship began to shift. The EU now frequently condemns Israeli actions, particularly concerning settlement activities in Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem. This consistent criticism is seen as an unfair singling out of Israel, especially when the EU remains relatively silent regarding severe human rights violations and territorial disputes in other regions. The European Union has consistently funded numerous anti-Israel non-governmental organizations that aim to delegitimize the Jewish state. Many of these NGOs promote destructive boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaigns against Israel. Others practice lawfare or spread false narratives about Israel. The EU also directly funds various construction projects in the biblical heartland of Israel, including schools and infrastructure in Arab communities, in an attempt to unilaterally shape the future borders of a Palestinian state. There are always concerns that EU financial aid may be misused or diverted to activities that undermine Israel's security. This includes the fact that funds meant for humanitarian purposes are sometimes used for weapons, incitement, or to support families of terrorists. Funding provided to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency by the EU ends up being used for educational materials that promote anti-Israel sentiments and incitement in schools in Gaza and the administered territories. Textbooks used in UNRWA schools glorify violence and martyrdom and do not advocate for peace and reconciliation. Diplomatic relations between the EU and Israel have been marked by periodic tensions. For example, in 2015, the EU introduced guidelines for labeling products in European stores as coming from Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, and Judea and Samaria, rather than from Israel, even though there are some 200 disputed territories around the world. None of them have been forced by the EU to relabel products. Israel condemned the move, calling it discriminatory and counterproductive. The EU's collective stance is also influenced by the policies of its individual member states. Countries like Spain and Ireland have been especially critical of Israel, advocating for stronger measures to pressure Jerusalem into compliance with their ideals. Conversely, nations like Germany and Hungary have maintained a more supportive approach toward Israel. Public opinion within Europe has also played a significant role in shaping the EU's policies toward Israel. Surveys and polls often indicate a more sympathetic view of the Palestinian cause among European citizens. This sentiment is influenced by media coverage, academic discourse, and the activities of various advocacy groups. Israeli leaders argue that the EU's focus on settlements and alleged human rights abuses is disproportionate and ignores the security challenges that Israel faces from terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah. Despite the tensions, Israel has sought to maintain strong economic and technological ties with European countries, recognizing the mutual benefits. The relationship between the United States and the European Union also influences the EU's stance on Israel. Under the Trump administration, the U.S. adopted a decidedly pro-Israel approach that contrasted sharply with the EU's more critical outlook. The Biden administration sought to strike a less pro-Israel approach. This has resulted in the underlying policies to become worse toward Israel. Looking ahead, the EU's relationship with Israel is likely to continue as a complex and contentious issue. However, in recent years, several pro-Israel politicians have been elected to the European Parliament. These leaders advocate for Israel's security, economic collaboration, and combating anti-Semitism. The fact that the European Union has become anti-Israel is rooted in a combination of historical developments, policy decisions, and public sentiment. While the EU claims its actions are legitimate, they often clash with Israel's security concerns and political realities. Up next, the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Today we're at the Magen David Dome Blood Center in Ramla. We're here to tour the facility and to learn about their preparations in the medical field in Israel. And we're also here to dedicate a Medicycle that has been donated by our Christian friends around the world.
Since 1980, the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem has been a voice of Christian support for Israel and connected the global church to the land of the Bible. Headquartered in Jerusalem, the ICEJ has taken action to stand with Israel by caring for Holocaust survivors, helping Jewish families return home to Israel, providing bomb shelters, fighting anti-Semitism around the world, and by inviting Christians to discover Israel for themselves.
We are just unveiling in a second this motor scooter that already saved the lives of 11 people, even though it's only 1 week old. Wow, here ICJ donated by the generous donation of the Korean family, Manitoba. Toda Rabah.
I think the most rewarding thing is the pure knowledge that whatever we do is to reach out a helping hand to a person in need. And it's even more fantastic when we learn that it changed their lives and are healing and are getting better. This is the most rewarding thing that any of us feel. I've been working with Christian supporters from Magen David Adom for many, many years. So to me, it's already something that, I don't know if the right term is used to, but still we admire it because it's not taken for granted. And this is a very important support because people in Israel not always understand and know how much care, love, and concern Christians from all over the world feel towards Israel as a country, to the people of Israel as human beings. And this type of support that Magen David Adom is receiving through Christian Friends of Magen David Adom, through so many ministries and Christian organizations and so forth, is a lifesaver. Christians from all over the world are our partners in saving lives. They stand shoulder to shoulder with us when we reach out and treat other patients, whether they have a heart attack or seizures or deliver a baby, or they are hurt by a car accident or terror attacks. They are all the time with us, and we in Magen David Adom feel their strength and their spirit. And I think this is the most important thing that people would know. We cherish the support. It's so important.
We want to say a huge thank you to all of our friends around the world who have donated so generously to our Israel in Crisis Fund, which is enabling us to help Israel in these difficult days with a variety of aid, whether it's these medical equipment or shelters or aid for evacuees or victims of terror or a whole variety of assistance that Israel can use in these days. We want to say thank you for giving so generously.
After Hamas brutally attacked Israel on October the 7th, 2023, the ICEJ has been actively standing with Israel and her people through advocacy and urgently needed aid projects. Now is the time for Christians to turn their love for Israel and the Jewish people into real action as never before. Your donation will help deliver bomb shelters to at-risk areas, provide necessary supplies for first responders, care for evacuees with food, shelter, clothing, and trauma care, and will eventually help rebuild these devastated communities. Visit ICEJUSA.tv to donate online or call 1-800-910-6355 and give your generous gift today.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Noy Shamir Heinrich.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.